Well, where are my rule followers out there? Anyone want to admit that they're a rule follower? Okay. You will enjoy the message today because if we're going to win at home, we need to have some rules, right? Growing up, I didn't participate in rules very much, especially at home. My family had this rule that if you swear, you had to have soap put in your mouth. Did anyone else's family do this? And my parents were just so darn good at not swearing. I don't think I ever saw them eat soap. Me, on the other hand, I've tasted a few different flavors of soap in my life. As I grew up, I learned to appreciate rules a little bit more. As a high school pastor, I actually would take students to camp, and we had 3 rules every year at camp. The first rule was we stick together. So if we eat or when we go to worship, we do those things together. The second rule was be on time. And on time meant 5 minutes early to any of the scheduled activities. The third rule was don't be a knucklehead. See, there were 3 goals for camp. We grow closer to God, we grow closer to each other, and we have fun. Anything that gets in the way of one of those things is what it meant to be a knucklehead. See, rules are intended to help make sure that goals get accomplished, and well-designed rules make sure those goals get accomplished efficiently, correctly, and without regret. They make sure we kind of are all on the same page, and rules sometimes even make sure we know what sorts of consequences need to be handed out and when. So for today, we're going to talk about some rules that are designed to help all of us win at home. But I want us to make sure we all know what we mean when we say win at home. Throughout this series, we've talked about this verse a few times. Jesus said in response to our worries and our needs in life, he said, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. What he's saying here is that there's something that's more important than us getting the things we want. There's something that's more important than us having a bigger bank account or a bigger house. There's something that needs to take priority over having a clean home or a quiet home or kids on the honor roll. There's actually something that comes before even our most basic needs and our biggest worries. Jesus said, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, which means everything else in our lives ought to come after that. So in this series, all the principles we've talked about, all the resources, all the events, the classes have been designed to help you and your family seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And today, my objective is to share with you 3, we're gonna call them house rules, 3 rules that are designed to help you keep his kingdom and his righteousness first. And these rules all come directly from wisdom that's found in the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament. Proverbs are these short, clever sayings that provide wisdom for different situations. And the book of Proverbs in the Bible it's this whole collection of these sayings. So I'm confident if we can put in place these 3, that we'll set ourselves up to win at home, to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Rule number 1 is this: walk with the wise. And for our context today, wise people are people who offer insight for how you or your family can seek first his kingdom and his righteousness in whatever stage of life you're currently in. The first rule for winning at home is really about how do we spend quality time with wise people. We talk about this all the time in our student ministry. We tell our students things like, your friends are determining your future. Your friends are influencing your future. And so we create as many opportunities we can for middle school and high school students to be around people, to be around peers and leaders who are helping encourage and strengthen their faith. In fact, pretty much everything we do with our students is designed around this rule. Our weekend programming, our events, our camps. We actually have a high school fall weekend coming up next week. You can still sign up for that. Everything we do with our students has this rule in mind. And the proverb that this comes from is Proverbs 13:20. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Notice if we spend time with wise people, this says we just kind of become wise. Kind of happens naturally. But a friend of fools doesn't necessarily naturally become a fool. In fact, a companion of fools may never themselves become a fool, but what they'll do is they will suffer the same harm as a fool because that's who they associate with. If you get in a car with a drunk driver, you suffer whatever harm they cause. If you invest your money with a foolish investor, you suffer whatever harm they cause. If you trust your friends when they tell you The Nutty Professor 2 is a good movie, you'll suffer for an hour and 49 minutes. If you're like me, I had some friends in college that convinced me it would be funny if I jumped off a dorm pretending to be a pterodactyl. I suffered a couple bruised ribs. You walk with the wise and become wise, for a friend of fools suffers, I don't know, in my case, a couple bruised ribs. So who are you walking with? Who are the people you're going through life with? And are they people that are helping you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness? A few years ago, my wife and I went through the 242 Kids child dedication class. These classes are actually happening at almost all of our locations this week. You can still sign up for those classes too. And during this class, we were asked to write down some values we wanted to instill in our son, that we were going to be committed to kind of raising him up with these values. And I want to share with you what we wrote down. I'll put it up here, but I'll read it from this plaque we have for him. It's important to know our son's name is Wilder. That's going to play a part in this. This is what we said. We said, we want our son to know that our love for him is wild, and God's love for him is wilder. That's actually where he gets his name from. We said we want him to be wild, wildly kind, wildly brave, wild with his love, wild with his generosity, wild with adventure, wild with grace, wild for Jesus, wild for others. We want him to know he is free to be wildly himself and that we will always be wild about him. You know who made this for our son? Not his mom and I. It was actually my sister-in-law. And then for his first birthday, we had some friends from our small group who put some of those phrases together on a t-shirt for him. Months after we had gone through this class, our closest friends and family were reminding us of the commitment we made. See, one of the things I love about our child dedication classes is that from the outset, they help us parents understand the sorts of people that we would be wise to surround ourselves with and surround our kids with. Do you have values for your family? Do you have values for your life? Have you established some values that help ensure that you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness? And if you don't, would you be willing to maybe today sit down and establish some for you or your family? And if you had some but you've drifted from them, would you be willing to sit down and reestablish some values that help ensure that you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness? See, if we walk with the wise, we naturally become wise. But a companion of fools suffers harm. See, if we aren't careful to establish values that help us seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, if we aren't careful to surround ourselves with the sort of people that help encourage and strengthen those values, our tendency is to drift towards whoever shares interests with us, not values, interests, whoever accepts us. But acceptance can sometimes be a trap, especially in the transitions of life. High school to college, college to the workplace, you move to a new town or city. Maybe you just got out of a relationship and you're looking to start a new one. Maybe you've been divorced, but now you're open to the idea of dating again. Especially in the transitions in life, our tendency, just kind of our human nature, is to gravitate towards people who share our interests or people who accept us. But we have to be careful to make friendships, to build relationships with people who encourage and strengthen the values that help us seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And those people may not share interests with us. They may eat at different restaurants. They may root for different teams. But if we spend time with them, they will make us wiser. And the best place, and definitely the easiest place to find those people, is in a small group. Part of the reason why small groups are so important for us around here is because small groups are just full of these people who are trying to help each other win at home. So, who are you walking through life with? Who are the people that are influencing you and your family? And are there people who are causing doubt in you? Are there people who are chipping away at your faith? Are there people that when you spend time with them, they bring out a different sort of person than you are everywhere else, and not in a good way? If there are people in your life that are causing you to compromise the values that help you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, those people are fools to you. And you would be wise to consider the harm that you or your family may suffer at their expense. Look, God loves those people, absolutely. But if there are people in your life that are causing you to feel like you have to be a little dishonest with your friends and family because you kind of live in two sort of lives, those relationships are foolish, and you need to end those relationships. They need someone, but the someone they need is not you. Rule number 1 for winning at home is walk with the wise. And rule number 2 is this: borrow someone's game plan. Here's what I mean by that. Someone has been through whatever season of life you're currently in and has figured out how to seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness in that season. Someone has accomplished what you're trying to accomplish in life and has come up with a game plan for how they did it. You would be wise to make an effort to find that person or those people and ask them if you could borrow their game plan. Especially if you're in a brand new season of life, some season of life you've never been through before. Because how could you possibly know what to do in a season of life you've never lived before? When my wife and I took home our son from the hospital, you know what we had to learn about being parents? Literally everything. We didn't know anything. At the time, our son was not even 5 pounds when we took him home from the hospital. And we put him in the car seat and we started driving. And we're like, so wait, how do we do this? Like, we're we allowed to have a child in our custody? And then we get home and we look at each other and we're like, I guess we just take turns holding him for 6 months. I don't know. Every parent that's ever had a first child, you know this feeling. Luckily for us, we had our family, we had people from our small group who were seasoned and seasons ahead of us. We could ask questions. We have many people that are still helping us navigate, how do we do this? Every college student, every engaged couple, anyone who's ever started a new season at a job, you know that feeling. Wait, how do I do this? How could you know how to do something in a season of life you've never been through? That's why the smartest thing you can do is find someone who's been through that season and won and say, hey, can I borrow your game plan? There's a proverb that goes like this: listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise. For some of this means we need to get better at listening to advice. For some of this means we need to get better at accepting discipline. For some of this means we need to stop pretending like, we can figure it out. Yeah. For some of us, this means we need to admit that we've gotten some things wrong. And you know what else it means? The at the end part. It means that if we're willing to do this, if we're willing to listen to advice and accept discipline, we'll not only be wise in this season, but that we'll be wise for the rest of our days. If you're the sort of person that the posture of your life, the pattern of your life is to listen to advice and accept discipline, you'll be wise in this season and in the seasons ahead. So, what's an area of your life where you could get better at listening to advice and accepting discipline? Are you parenting toddlers? Are you parenting adult children? Have you recently retired? Have you recently gone through a tragedy or a health scare? Are you trying to restore a marriage? Someone has been through whatever you're currently going through and has figured out how to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness in that. Maybe your next step is to find that person or those people and ask, hey, can I borrow your game plan? And our church is full of people who have done this. And some of them don't even know the wisdom they have until they're asked. And many won't know that you want or need their game plan unless you ask. One of the things I've learned over my years as a pastor, hearing many of your stories and sitting down with many families in this church, is that there's some stuff that I've learned that I didn't really know I learned until I started talking with people. There's things that Brittany and I have been through that we're able to help other people with. But we don't know anyone needs our game plan or wants it unless they ask us. About 7 years ago, my wife and I kind of fell into a game plan for finding rest and connection in our marriage. We both have a tendency to kind of just work until we burn out. We have a tendency to do that in our jobs, but also in our relationship. And so we found ourselves through those first few years just kind of working ourselves dry, mentally, physically, relationally, emotionally. And so one weekend, we both realized, hey, we have Mondays off. We both have Mondays off. Let's just go on an adventure on Monday. What if we just started doing Monday adventures? And so we started this thing that we call Monday Adventures. Every Monday, we go somewhere. It doesn't really matter where. We try to look for a good cup of coffee and a good place to hike. But the point is just that we're getting away, we're connecting, we're resting. And one week, we drove all the way to Pittsburgh and back on a Monday. Because why not? It's an adventure. And there's good coffee in Pittsburgh. We don't go that far too often. It's kind of crazy, but then we had our son, and we said, okay, we got to include him in these adventures. So this is what we did. We bought ourselves a jar. We put 939 marbles in it. One for every week we're going to have with our son between when he was born and when he turns 18. And we said, what if every week when we go on a Monday adventure, we just lose one of our marbles? So that's what we do. That's our game plan, is we intentionally lose our marbles. We're not perfect. Sometimes we forget. But we take these marbles and we leave them at coffee shops and on hikes. We left them at the zoo, not in the cages. We're on the trail. We've buried them in beaches. We put these things all over the place. They're a reminder both of how much time we have left with our son, but they're also a reminder to be intentional as a family and spending time together. It's our game plan. And we've been able to share the Monday Adventure thing and the marble thing with many new couples and new parents. And honestly, every time we get to share it, we love to share it. We love to share our story. But we don't know anyone needs that or wants that unless they ask. And sometimes when they ask, we're like, man, we actually do have a game plan for that. And we're not perfect. There's a lot of things we don't have game plans for. There's many game plans we've borrowed. There's a lot of things we still need to figure out. But when we get a chance to share something, it's just so rewarding, especially if you're in a new season of life. Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end, you will be counted among the wise. And if you've been through something and you've sought first his kingdom and his righteousness, you might not even know how much wisdom you have until you start sharing. So if someone invites you to grab coffee with them, or if someone invites you to drop in their small group, will you say yes? And if you've got something, will you share it with someone? Maybe you've heard this quote before, that experience is a hard teacher because she gives the test first and the lesson afterward. The only way to avoid this is to get out in front and invite wise counsel in. Then you'll have the test and you'll be ready. For when the test comes, you'll have the lesson. Borrowing someone's game plan is not weak. It's wise. It's a sign of maturity. You want to win at home? Walk with the wise. Borrow someone's game plan. And the third rule is this: pay attention to the signs. Signs on the road are there for our direction and our protection. And signs in relationships, signs at home, do the same. There's a proverb that says this: the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Prudent just means wise and careful. The prudent see the danger and they respond to it. The wise see signs and they pay attention to the signs. They pay attention to what's going on around their life. They pay attention to what's going on with their kids and their friends and their kids' friends. They pay attention to what's going on in their marriage. And when they see something, they do something about it. Because it's always a temptation to ignore signs, isn't it? And especially relationally, it's a temptation to ignore signs. And the reason why we usually ignore these is because we just don't really know what to do. But nothing gets better in a relationship because we ignore it. If you don't know what to do, take refuge. Get advice from someone. If more than one person has told you something that you need to work on, that's a sign. You would be wise to see that as danger and take refuge, to do something about it. I've been pulled over before because I just ignored signs. I mean, literally, just honestly didn't see something that was right in front of me, get pulled over, and I pay the penalty. There's also been times where I've just kind of intentionally disregarded the signs. I mean, speed limits are a suggestion, right? Anna? You pull up to a no turn on red, I'm in a hurry, I don't see any police. We'll just make this turn, just this one time. Some of us do more than just ignore signs at home. Some of us are intentionally disregarding them. If you've ever heard yourself say things like, hey, don't ever bring that up again. I don't want to hear that anymore. Quit telling me that. Those are signs. What is that for you? What sorts of things do you respond to in those ways? The wise see those as signs and they do something about it. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and they pay the penalty. And you may not be the only one who pays. Because everyone who looks up to you, everyone who depends on you, everyone you're responsible for may end up paying as well. I mean, you don't have to look too far in your past to find a time where you were hurt, where you were left out, because somebody else didn't pay attention to a sign. And now you've got, I don't know, what do we call it, stuff you deal with? Stuff that makes you suspicious or vulnerable in future relationships. And it's hard to unpack that stuff, isn't it? But what happens if we don't? What happens if we don't deal with the pain from our past is it just kind of like takes root in us and we start to carry that into all our other relationships. Often it shows up as like anger, resentment, bitterness. And if we don't deal with it, we forget even where that started. We forget where it comes from. It just is, it's kind of all over. If we don't see it as danger and take refuge, if we just keep going, wisdom tells us we'll pay the penalty. The Apostle Paul warns us like this. He said, in your anger, do not sin, and do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Does the devil have a foothold in your life? It's often the penalty we pay. His anger, his bitterness, his resentment attached itself to your life? Is it hiding out in the corners of your relationships and you just sort of drag them along? You would be wise to see that as a sign and do something about it. Does your family have to tiptoe around your anger issues? Does your family have to navigate your emotional outbursts, your mood swings? Are there certain things that the people closest to you have to avoid because they always escalate something in you? Those are signs. Is your family trying their best to ignore your substance abuse problem? It's a sign. And the people who love you most would love for you to unpack those things or find someone that would help you unpack those things. Because if you don't, if you just keep going, you'll pay the penalty. And so will everyone who's close to you. So, let's pay attention to the signs. Quick recap. Here's 3 rules for winning at home. Number 1, walk with the wise. Surround yourself with the sort of people who help you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Number 2, borrow someone's game plan. Listen to advice, accept discipline from people who have been through whatever you're going through. And pay attention to the signs. If something feels off, don't ignore it, unpack it. If we are committed to instilling in our lives and our families the sort of things that help ensure that we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, I'm confident that we'll start to see some wins at home. But if you're not seeing wins at home, especially if you've been tracking with us through this series and things aren't turning around quite as quickly as you hoped they would, hang in there. Don't give up. Blessed is the one who responds to wisdom. I told you at the beginning of the message, little kid Misha didn't participate much in rules, especially at home. I think I just didn't understand why I was supposed to or needed to. And as I was putting together this message today, I kind of started to feel like, well, I'm just telling them to follow these rules and seek first his kingdom, but 11-year-old Misha's in the back of my mind going, but why? Why would what's in it for me? And I think the answer to that is in the second half of that Matthew 6:33 verse, when Jesus said, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. What are all these things? Jesus is referring to everything we need, everything we're concerned about. He promises that God will take care of all these things. And I thought about that and I thought, well, of course he would. He loves us. And God demonstrated his love for us by taking care of our needs and our concerns, and not just the pressing ones. Contained within this promise is something far deeper than just how are we going to pay the bills and get food on the table. Because shortly after Jesus said these words, he went to the cross to take care of our sin. On the cross, Jesus paid the price for our sin. And when he rose from the dead, he took care of what sin had broken in our lives and in the world. He conquered death. Jesus, through his death and resurrection, took care of our deepest needs and the deepest concerns of our life. So why should we be diligent to do the things that ensure that we put his kingdom and his righteousness first? Because the king of that kingdom loved us so much that he laid down his life for us. So can we establish a few rules that help us put his kingdom and his righteousness first? Let's walk with the wise. Let's borrow someone's game plan. Let's pay attention to the signs. And if you've done these things in your life, will you share it with someone? Can we make a commitment to help each other win at home? I think we'd be blessed if we do. I'd love to pray for you. God, thank you. Thank you for the wisdom of Proverbs, but thank you far more for Jesus. And God, may we, in response to what you've done for us, humble ourselves and put in place the values, put in place the rules, establish the boundaries and parameters of our life that help us keep the first things first. And God, as we take steps to seek your kingdom and your righteousness, to you be all the honor and glory forever and ever. Amen.